10.
It's been a shocking week for the Abbott government. First, the Prime Minister took too long to admit he did in fact promise on TV the night before the election there would be no cuts to the ABC.
Prime Minister, no one will now own up to making that statement. Does the Prime Minister have any idea who said this?
Madam Speaker, of course I made that statement.
But that came only after some ministers got fed up pretending there wasn't a promise and Abbott hadn't just broken it.
Certainly there are cuts to the... He said no cuts to the ABC or SBS. There are cuts to the ABC or SBS.
The government knows it's in trouble and this week started to change. The Prime Minister's office privately briefed journalists that its unpopular plan to make people pay $7 for doctor visits would be dropped. But the next day, the minister most responsible for that co-payment denied it was being dumped.
We intend to take it to the Parliament.
And take it in its current form, or are you open to negotiating?
Our policy stands.
And to top it all off, the Liberals lost the Victorian election. Joining me is Immigration Minister Scott Morrison. Thanks for your time.
Good morning, Andrew.
Former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett said yesterday the Abbott government was a shambles and was a big factor in the Liberals losing yesterday's Victorian election. You sure didn't help, did you?
Well, Jeff is entitled to his view, but I really go to what both leaders said last night, and neither of them made those references. It's always terrible to lose an election because of the policies and the way we think states and in fact the federal government should be governed. No government can look at an election loss lightly and not reflect on those losses, as I'm sure we will do and other state governments around the country will do. But at the same time, state governments, state elections are state elections, and we know there were very strong issues there in that state election. There was a very big union turnout on the booths yesterday, and they were prosecuting issues there very heavily and have been over a long period of time, and we had been behind for a long time.
That's true, but the Labor Party ran Tony Abbott's pictures on all the advertising outside every polling booth in Victoria yesterday. You don't think there's a message that you should be getting?
Well, I think in every election, whether it's state or federal, every government is going to look at what the issues were there and what the messages are. And no sensible government would not do that. But at the same time, when you look around the country, I mean, in New South Wales here, the Baird government is 10 points ahead. The Newman government's 8 points ahead. And what I saw last night was a very cocky Bill Shorten, frankly overreaching last night as he sought to make himself the centre of attention, which is Bill Shorten's stock in trade. He always thinks it's always about him. What the Victorian election was about yesterday was what was happening in Victoria, and to the extent that there are issues that the federal government has to look at in the context of that, then of course we will. Bill Shorten's always looking at himself.
Why did the Prime Minister's office tell journalists the Medicare co-payment would be dumped when Joe Hockey then said it wouldn't?
Well, I'm not aware that that is what happened, but what I am aware of is that, as the Treasurer said and as the Health Minister said, this is our policy, and it's our policy because 10 years ago Medicare was costing us $8 billion, now it's costing us $20 billion, and in 10 years' time it'll cost us $34 billion, and you need a sustainable policy on how to manage these costs. Now, everyone knows we're working through the Senate. Many ministers are working through the Senate and are having to make some practical adjustments where necessary to where we can further see our policies move forward. And I think that's where things are at. And I think we will continue to go forward in that way. I mean, government's about getting things done, Andrew, as you know. And we've got a lot done in our first year. We need to continue to work to ensure that people know what we've been able to achieve to date. We all know about getting rid of the carbon tax and the mining tax, and we all know the progress we've had on stopping the boats and getting these roads underway. And the budget task remains the big objective, and that is something we won't shirk away from.
And yet there's no doubt there was that mixed communications. I mean, journalists were briefed by the Prime Minister's office. They wrote about that. Do you think there's a problem with the Prime Minister's... Yeah, but do you think there's a problem with the way the Prime Minister's office works? Do you need, for example, a media strategist in there to better handle these communications?
Well, Andrew, look, I just focus on policy and getting things done, which all ministers in the government are focused on doing. I'm not going to.
No, I don't doubt that. I mean, you've got a reputation for that. But I'm asking about, this is a self-inflicted wound. You clearly, I mean, obviously, what should the government do to fix that kind of stuff?
Well, I think governments always just have to focus on their agenda and implementing it and making sure that they're communicating to the Australian people about what we're getting done. And we are getting a lot done. Now, the issues of how that's managed internally, frankly, matters for others, not me. But what I want to focus on, and what I know the ministers and the cabinet, now everyone through to our backbenchers are focused on, is just communicating what we are getting done. And within a year, and I think this has been a strong year for us in terms of policy delivery on the things we took to the election. We need to continue to ensure that people are aware of that. And where there are bugs in the system, they'll have to be worked through. But at the end of the day, it is about governments achieving. And I think when people go to the polls, they look at, has this government been able to achieve things? Have they been able to get things done? And in the areas I've already mentioned, we have been able to do that. And the main job we're doing, Andrew, is we're cleaning up this horrific mess. The mess we inherited is significant. You've written about it, others have written about it and broadcast on it. Let's never walk away from the fact that the mess is great and the challenge of fixing it is difficult, and that is going to attract criticism along the way, and it's going to get hard along the way. And it has got hard this year, and it's going to continue to be hard, but we'll never shirk away from cleaning up Labor's mess.
No, but Scott, right there, right? Now, that should have been the message every single day, OK? And it hasn't been, as you know. You say the government's got achievements. I agree, there are achievements. There are also some failures. But the problem is that the government's way behind in the polls despite that. Now, this week was a shocker. The budget's not under control. What has gone wrong? Well,
I'm going to focus on what we're going to get right over the next 2 years. And what we're going to get right over the next 2 years is we're going to continue to clean up this mess.
No, but Liberal supporters want to know, Scott, what are you going to do to change? That's what they want to know, I think.
Well, Andrew, this is what I was just trying to say. Over the next 2 years before the next election, or thereabouts, just under that, it is a process of continuing to get things done on the ground and to communicate that clearly right across the country. I mean, there are around 25, 26 seats or less, which are under 6% in the country at the moment. The vast majority of those are actually in New South Wales and Queensland. So I look forward to Bill Shorten coming up to the New South Wales and Queensland state elections and be introducing the Labor leader at both of those elections on election night. But we will be focusing on the ground across the country and communicating the good work that we are doing, because this is a government that is rich in policy achievements. We need to work harder, as you've said, on the politics and managing the politics. But the policy achievements of this government, I think, are very strong, and that gives us something very, very strong to work with. I mean, the previous government was all about the politics and not about the policy, and that's why they had no achievements to speak of.
That's funny, isn't it?
This
the problem here is the exact opposite. Yeah, look, you're right. Scott, let me tell you one thing that a number of particularly Liberal supporters would say does need to change. You have essentially stopped the boats, although you just had to turn one back from Sri Lanka. Now, that was one of the government's biggest challenges. Yeah, that was one of the government's biggest challenges, and you did it. Now, are you frustrated that in the months since you've done that, it's like kicking 10 goals in the first quarter and being benched for the rest of the game, you've been sitting there twiddling your thumbs, no new challenges given?
Well, the challenge on the borders remains. I mean, yesterday we had the second biggest ATS haul that we've seen in this country. And in terms of ICE, it was the biggest haul we've seen in this country. Now, what I've been working on is not just stopping the boats, but we're stopping the drugs, and we're stopping the gangs, and we're stopping the other criminal activity that is seeking to come across our border. We're setting up the Australian Border Force in July. I mean, my focus is very much on the border, because the border is a choke point for where criminals will seek to come and do this country harm. Now, whether
Scott,
it's
that's
people
great,
smugglers, you're right. We set.
Yeah, no, that's great, but you very neatly sidestepped my argument. You're sitting there. People want you to have more things to stop. I think that's the problem. You're right, the boat's done, drugs just done. What else should be stopped? You must be frustrated. Some of your colleagues are even lobbying for you not to be given more responsibility. That's a joke.
Well, look, these are issues that others discuss in other places, Andrew, and what people I think know about me is I focus on the job I've got, I focus on getting results in the job I've got, I'm part of a team. You kindly say about my role in stopping the boats, that has been a team effort. One of the biggest supports I've had, the biggest support I've had in stopping the boats has been from Tony Abbott. And Tony Abbott and I, you won't find a cigarette's pepper difference between us on border protection, and that wasn't the case under Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd and the litany of immigration ministers that they had. So the achievements that we have in my area and in the other areas, whether it's Andrew Robb or Greg Hunt, I mean, Greg Hunt has signed up $1 trillion of environmental projects, clearing away the green tape to enable those projects to proceed should they be able to do it.
Scott,
Josh
this is terrific.
$2 billion in regulation cuts.
Wonderful. That's reaching out to your colleagues. That's great. No, but Scott, before I go...
No, that's talking about our achievements.
No,
Andrew.
great. But
that's
before I go, I don't want you to lose this opportunity. I want you to come in from a long run. I talked before the break about Gillian Triggs, the Human Rights Commission boss. She didn't call her inquiry into children in detention while Labor was in government. The problem was worse. She waited a year until you were in power, fixing it. Do you have confidence in Gillian Triggs?
I think the Australian people will see this inquiry for what it is, and I think you've laid out the facts very well. But here are the facts. The number of children in held detention since we came to government has been halved. Halved. And I don't recall the chorus of opposition about children in detention when it was reaching almost 2,000 people. Because we're stopping the boats, children are getting out of detention, and I intend to get more out, and we currently have a bill in the Senate which is being blocked by Labor and the Greens that would see more children come out of detention. And so Labor are big on rhetoric when it comes to these things. I've heard the advocacy and Ms Triggs and others, Professor Triggs, say all of these things, but at the end of the day, this government is delivering on getting children out of detention because we're stopping the boats.
Should she resign?
I think people will look at her inquiry, they will look at her inquiry and make her judgment, and then they'll look at the facts and know that this government has said what it would do, and that is get children out of detention by stopping the boats. And look, what her role is a matter for the Attorney-General, but the way that this inquiry has been conducted, I don't think reflects well on that inquiry or those who have been running it.
Scott Morrison, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much. Good to be with you.